Okay, so I'm so glad that I have everyone kind of joining us. And there's two parts to this that we're going to be covering today: supporting new users, families, and their teams. And then we're going to be getting into some efficient printing techniques. And I know some of this, as we've already kind of talked about, is that you kind of do what works in the moment. We're all using a combination of different programs. We have different files. We're just doing our best. And then just kind of keeping with the beauty of the pod language. So we'll go until about 12, and then I'll turn recording off, and we'll have, any other questions or discussions that we want to have in addition. So I put some of the specific questions that I had received from the Google Forms on how are we supporting new users, getting education. So one of the questions was, what is the best way to support new users? And coming from the side of, my background was special education for about 15 years, and now I am the parent of a pod user. I have a 9-year-old with Rett syndrome. And so she has very involved, complex communication needs, and her access methods have even changed. So we started pod with her when she was 2. So once I left teaching and became a consultant, my focus has been on building those AAC teams and what that looks like, and how best to support not just the user, but the family and the outpatient therapy teams, the school teams, the medical professionals, because there's so many pieces. So I'm currently working on, for a presentation, kind of a building an AAC team checklist from a parent slash special educator viewpoint, because I have obviously a very personal view of the medical needs and feeding tubes and positioning, and just my personality. I can't help but look at all the data and the research anytime we buy new equipment. So I want to be able to share that, especially when I'm, getting questions. How do we get parent buy-in? Obviously, I'm from the parent side. So the biggest thing for buy-in for parents or teams is, how do we support this whole child or this whole user? Because there are so many pieces going on. They may be going through equipment fittings, they may be going through medical needs. And I know communication is obviously a #1 priority, but it has to fit and it has to go along with these other things that are going on. So that's kind of my big focus. Questions about education and training. I know everyone's wanting pod workshops. So this, just to kind of put out there, I assume maybe all of you know this that are attending. Certified pod trainers are contracted by school systems or other agencies. And so if you're hearing people requesting, the tricky part is that they need to coordinate with trainers to get them to their school or their agency. So, from pod, obviously Gail Porter, the creator, is in Australia. There isn't a specific pod organization setting up trainings. So parents can help facilitate this, SLPs, assistive tech, AAC professionals, consultants need to work with those organizations to get them to come in to do those trainings. And actually, this doesn't really affect anyone currently. I knew 3 in the US, but yeah, that's going to be really hard for any of you guys to get to. The other way to get some education and training is if you're working with a certified trainer. So Linda Burkhart, Kelly Fauner, the list I believe is on the pod website, or someone, myself, as an advanced pod trainer. So I am going through the certification to be a full certified pod trainer, but I am considered an advanced pod trainer because I have been to the 5-day advanced workshop. And that allows me, if individuals are consulting with me, I can work with them on alternative access files and support them, getting the consultation or help connect for trainings. My goal is, as I'm going through the certification by next spring, to be able to be doing my own introductory trainings. Some other specific questions that I had were best way to train communication partners, family members, team members from the school. We always kind of go back to how pod is based. So with those branches, The best way to get those partners trained is one, making sure that the book is with them. And then two, kind of just go branch by branch. Start familiarizing yourself, remembering that PODD is a symbol-based communication system. And especially if we are readers and literate, we always revert to, sometimes when I glance at my books, or if I'm modeling with a client, or if I'm working with my daughter, I read the symbols and I have stopped looking at, I read the words rather than looking at the symbols. So that's always a good thing to come back to. Remember that your users are looking at the symbols. Yes, Millie.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I really just wanted to quickly add. So with the training of communication partners, we run weekly sort of pod groups.
Okay.
We kind of start off doing music-based sort of ones, and it's kind of a really good way to model the pod books with the staff at our school. So we try and get different staff members to come with the specific pod students each time.
That's
And we do
amazing.
we kind of hide some of the musical instruments, and then we kind of play them from under the blanket, and then we're like, oh, what can we hear, sort of thing. And then they all go around and choose whether they want it fast or slow, and that sort of thing. And that's a really, really
Okay.
nice way of doing it. And we've started to sort of expand that into different like food songs and like music, so all different things like that. But we found that a really, really good way to get staff sort of skilled up and more
I
confident
love
using
that.
pod books.
Do you mind me asking, how many pod users do you have in your school or your organization?
Um, we've probably got about 15,
That's
but we have a lot
incredible.
of communication book users as well. So we tend to sort of merge the sort of pod groups that we do. They've now sort of changed into communication/pod book groups. Um, but yeah, so that seems to work really, really well for us and supporting the staff.
Okay. And do you mind telling or sharing a little bit more about your school, or you don't have to share kind of personal names, or but kind of what
Yeah,
the
yeah.
setting is like?
Yeah, so we work in a special needs school. So we do from early years, so from I think the age of 4 up until the age of 19. So we have a college as well, a whole range of students from like more PMLD, SEMH, like a very, very vast variety. Some of them that might have different access needs, challenging behaviour, so on, so forth, sort of thing. But we have, um, so I'm the communication support worker there. So I support universally kind of all the children from a communication point of view. And then we've got our speech and language therapist, and we work really closely together with the more targeted children too. So yeah, that's kind of how it kind of works.
Okay. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
So you're welcome.
I did also have some questions about incorporating pod or kind of communication in general into the IEP. So interestingly enough, I know that's probably going to look very different for where everyone is, but I think all the pieces necessary for communication are going to remain the same. So having that basic understanding, if you're working with other educators, other professionals, other therapists, families, helping them understand that you always need to be looking at the entire user. So when you're going through their present level or their strengths or what kind of areas you need to be working on, you're thinking about not just that communication, but the access methods and thinking about medical needs that may affect this. I also went to the Teaching Movements for Communication course this summer. So also remembering that piece, and you are not just involving your SLP, but you need to be thinking about positioning. How can your physical therapist be supporting this? How can your occupational therapist be supporting this? So those are the tips I like to give. And that also comes back to building that AAC team and kind of making a checklist at the beginning of each year. These are the people that are involved, these are their roles, and then everybody kind of regularly coming together, like Millie mentioned with their weekly based pod groups, regularly coming together. Where are changes needing to be made? How can we support maybe general education teachers, or how can we support other therapists who may not have the same background, or how can we support the family? I'll kind of jump over here, supporting parents, getting that buy-in from parents. I already kind of touched on that a little bit, where I'm kind of from the other side, where I've had experience myself and some clients getting buy-in from the school. And I think the biggest thing there is remembering all those pieces, possible medical complexities going on, equipment, things like that. We just recently spent the last, well, between getting her fitted and getting the equipment put together, you know, a year and a half, maybe working on some wheelchair stuff. And so that plays into kind of what's going on in our side on family life. So knowing that we've got a great team at school supporting her is really incredible as well in terms of her communication. So one specific question I got on here that I'll have you guys unmute if you want, or put in the chat window: printing double-sided. I will personally say I just use sticker paper, and I will get into more details on specific printing materials and what I use. Last night I had someone talk about printing double-sided. Obviously you need to be able to print, you know, the two-sided printer, but a lot of times pages aren't lining up. So if anybody kind of current or in our session right now has any double-sided printing tips, feel free to share that as we go in. Okay.
I was just gonna say, I don't have tips, but I'm currently trying to make my first double-sided book. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears.
Okay, yes, I will talk about that with the sticker paper. Oh, it looks like, Ro, you're using sticker paper too? In the grand scheme of things, I have found, especially if I'm printing alternative access books, the sticker paper really just is faster. Whether it's for lists or the backside of another page, it really works well for me. The only downside could be is if you're working with an individual who there's a chance that the sticker paper might get wet frequently. Millie, yes.
Hello, yes. So we print double-sided.
Okay.
So, but the way we do it, so we use the sort of like plastic non-tear paper.
The TerraSlate or something different?
Or it's probably a UK company, so I don't know. I've forgotten what it's called. But it's basically sort of like plastic paper. It's like unterrible and it's like wipe clean. So if books get mucky and stuff. But what we have to do is print each page at a time. So I'll do like 1-1 sort of thing, flip it, then do 2-2. But by doing it like that, we're able to print a whole pod book in about an hour and a half.
Okay.
But that doesn't include all the editing. But we had the same issue with the alignment. But we found at our school there's quite a few printers, but the biggest, most industrial size printer is the one that lines everything up perfectly, whereas the smaller ones are the ones that we sort of struggle with. But that seems to work very well for us.
Okay. And I wonder, especially if you guys have multiple users, I feel like if you have that larger printer and you're doing it multiple times, it's probably easier to kind of remember how exactly you put it in the printer. Because I think on a smaller scale, if you're only printing kind of one book at a time, every time you go to do it, it's a learning process again of what direction did I put it in the printer?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of pages which go straight into the bin because you've put it in upside down the wrong way and it doesn't match up properly. It's one of them tasks you have to really get your head back into, and you have to sit in like a quiet room and not have anyone distract you because it is a very, very long task.
I know exactly what you mean.
But yeah.
And that's why, you know, that first thing I put on there, exploring drafts, just printing on regular paper, I recommend that for all books, whether you're exploring language levels or you're figuring out how to use your binding machine, how to get everything lined up if you're trying to print two-sided. Because if you're using that kind of tear-proof paper or any of the paper that has more of a cost to it, it's a very stress-inducing process. So I automatically now just print something in paper. And I will say, even one of my books that was in a preschool, where did I set it? So it was with some 3 to 5 year olds. I printed on paper. I did print the first Nope, wrong book, sorry. I printed the first few pages and laminated them, and then the rest of the book is just paper, and the tabs are a little kind of banged up, and this one I didn't even reinforce with tape or anything, but these lasted through preschoolers. So I think it's one of those things, not letting perfection be the enemy of good and trying to explore the draft before kind of committing to the more expensive paper. So I have a question, a link for the type of sticker paper you have used. I will put that in towards the end. I think I just found something random. I bought it in bulk on Amazon, and I use it for a lot of things. I use it for all my lists now. I actually just recently had a client book that I had completely bound and finished. And then last minute check, I found that one small link on people that linked back to visit was the wrong number. And so I cut a very tiny piece of sticker paper just to put over my TerraSlate paper that linked to the correct page. And you can use it if you're making changes, personalizations. Excuse me. Oh, good. So Millie has shared the specific paper that she uses. I'll make sure to kind of make a list of that and share with the group after we're all finished. Thank you, Millie. Rose says she prints out with first and most used pages laminated as well. Okay, and then Ro, in the rest of the book, are you just doing on paper? Okay. So I think some people are afraid to do that, but it really, they can last, especially depending on, access method, and you can reinforce. I've just used packing tape to reinforce my tabs. How many pages are the books you make? I would say on average, okay, Rose, 40. My pages, they run anywhere 80 to 140, yeah, depending on what access method or size of the language. Other general tips that I have on here: avoid trimming into those gray areas to ensure, the visibility of the entire page when you go to bind it. Also, small tip I've found, I usually wait to trim my pages until after I've punched the holes for the binding, because same thing, I've had those stress-inducing moments where I've trimmed it too small, and then when I go to bind it, I end up in the wrong place on the page, or I don't have my binding lined up correctly. And then also, whether I'm trimming pages or punching them with the binding machine, I do them just a couple pages at a time. The same thing, I've had an experience where I thought, oh, I can get away with doing 4, 5, 6, 7 pages, and inevitably they will end up crooked, and then my binding is messed up. And so where I thought I was spending or saving time, I actually spend more time then because I've had to reprint pages. Okay, other random binding, printing materials that I personally have used. I have used Write in the Rain, so that's the waterproof one. And then my final drafts, when clients have settled into, or when my daughter has settled into a book that we're going to be in for a while, I typically use TerraSlate. And then same thing, I've always start with the paper draft, and then once we're committed and I've kind of noted personalizations, I'll print on that TerraSlate. I usually use 5 mil. Sometimes I'll do categories or the first few pages and a little bit thicker. Again, there is that cost with TerraSlate, and I'm sure it's probably similar to what Millie shared. I'll have to look at that one. But usually if you're buying in bulk, that is easier. Sticker paper, I mentioned that already. Laminating options. Last night we did talk about this as well. Some people are using 3 mil laminating. Same thing, I don't recommend laminating until you've kind of explored that first draft just on paper, because with laminating, when you're trimming tabs, you're basically doing it twice, because you're trimming your tab and then you're laminating and then trimming that again. My covers, I just cut up plastic folders You can also use corrugated plastic to make a cover that will form kind of a tent that it can also double as a stand. If you look on the PODD Facebook groups and you just search for corrugated plastic cover, you can find that. Binding techniques. The recommended is that 1 page are done on the coils and the 2 page are done with the comb binding. This I have reinforced with foil tape. Some people use duct tape. The brand I found to be the best for binding machine and coils and combs is TrueBind, but I just get it on Amazon. That's just my personal experience. So if anybody's had other that they really like, feel free to share. I'd love to be able to kind of put a resource list together on that. Another random thing on my list here is baby powder. I have used this in the past when printing on TerraSlate, because especially if they're coming off the printer hot, I don't know if anyone else has experienced the static electricity and all my pages get stuck together and it drives me crazy, especially when I'm, very carefully trying to line them up to bind them or trim, just a couple pages at a time. So if I sprinkle a little bit of baby powder in between them and kind of rub it on the pages, that prevents that. Again, just a weird little personal tip I found. I've used Mod Podge, which is basically a craft glue to avoid that double-sided printing. I have just trimmed it down and then glued a page. Actually, let me get that book. This book is about 3 years old. And this one I printed on TerraSlate and then used that kind of craft glue. You can barely see the edge there. I cut it a little smaller. I just glued it to the back of the previous page. Foil or duct tape, I mentioned that's what I use to reinforce my comb binding. PVC or CPVC for the straps and the stands. Got that back here as well. I'm sure everybody kind of has their own systems for these. I don't have my stand handy, but same thing. If you look on the PODD Facebook groups and you just search for PVC PODD book stand, there's some really great ones that will show you just seeing the picture, you can see how you can make the bottom and then the top of it that will slide on here. The CPVC is just a smaller version. You can usually find it in like home improvement aisles. And that one I use for my comb bindings that have a smaller binding. And then the adjustable straps. This one is just really like a camera strap I found. I do like to, for mine, I make them that they can come off and on, but adjustable is nice depending on if you're hanging it over a wheelchair or using it kind of as a crossbody. Was there any questions on materials or other tips that anybody else has before I start talking about software programs? Not seeing anything coming in. Okay, so this is based on, just current knowledge that I have, talking to other PODD trainers and conversations that I see out there, and then some of the conversations that we mentioned or that we talked about at the beginning. So options that are out there, Mind Express is available for software. Assistiveware SimPod. They also on their website have a really great blog about tips for printing, which it specifically applies to SimPod, but it can be used for, there's some other information in there about printing books in general. And then Boardmaker. So first one, Mind Express. They currently do have a staff that is dedicated to the pod development process. So Gail Porter and Linda Burkhart are currently working with Mind Express, and it is starting to kind of be shared that some of the pod trainers are moving to this platform to be prepared for this change. So with that staff being dedicated, what's happening right now is that primarily Gail and Linda, they're working through the creation of the different alternative access files. Okay, good. We just got our copy of Mind Express yesterday. I'm very excited too, Brandis. I would love if you would keep us kind of posted too. And I'm gonna sign up for the trial and I'm gonna start exploring it too. Mind Express does have PCS symbols. I'm glad to see, just playing around with it, it was very easy. So with Mind Express, what they're working on right now is making sure to have not just one book for each access method, but making sure that they have the full language development set for each alternative. So just like there is currently 12 language levels for the direct access templates. So Linda Burkhart has been working with Mind Express for quite a few years. And this summer, I did speak with Gail. This is kind of the team that they're currently working with. Yes, they do have the PCS symbols, and you can also sign up for a 30-day trial. So if you know of other professionals or other families that would like to try it, and then they obviously have the electronic version if you're looking for that. Currently, it's the trials include the direct access, and then they will be, like I said, they will be working on the alternative access. Yes, Brandis?
I was just wondering if you've done the trial yet, because I tried to get the trial in the fall, but it didn't come with the pod page sets. I asked them if that was available and they said it wasn't, that you could only get them for an additional fee if you were doing the trial. It was just like the main, like the base level Mind Express. I don't know, maybe it's changed now that they've like bumped it up recently into the American market, but not sure.
That's a very good question. As I was double checking to see what was out there and kind of updates on trials, I wondered about that because I remember the same thing happening with Tobii. It was kind of an additional in terms of trials because it's all needs to be worked with Gail. So she works with the developers, and it's kind of considered like an outside of their normal, what they're creating. But yeah, I will double check on that. Yeah. I'll check and see if I can find anything else out. The other, one of the other softwares that is out there is SimPod. I don't know if anyone has any experience. I've not, again, personally used it, but they do have editing options and you can print the direct access books. Again, that's kind of where, if you're looking for the alternative access, that's the fastest one that you're going to see is probably going to be through Mind Express. SimPod uses symbol sticks. Same thing, you can obtain a 30-day trial, and that would be the pod. So at the, at the very least, you're looking at the pod language system. So the branches, the pathways will all be similar. You can print those direct access books from there for your, your direct select users. And then you would also be able to have your non-electronic next to your electronic version. Boardmaker, I think this is the world that many of us have lived in. And so some incompatibility issues with the newest versions. Some of them are being corrected, but it's slow. From my understanding, the majority of the team that was originally working on this, I think when Gail Porter was working with them more, has mostly left. And then what has happened when they've, switched to newer versions, Boardmaker 7, because especially the alternative access files were made in older versions, you're seeing a lot of errors popping up. symbols missing when I was looking through mine, because I actually have the Boardmaker discs, and Millie shared earlier with Boardmaker 7, you can get the USB for Boardmaker 6. So that's exciting because there's always that fear that the disc is going to die on me. But my personal experience was that I was able to upload, entire books using, compressed zip folders of entire books. And the biggest errors that I found were images from the PCS symbols where the color had been changed, or the categories. So transportation, animals, anything that had multiple images on it. Let me see if I can, were the ones that were showing up basically with a big red X. So characters was another one. I think the original PCS symbol for I like this is another color, so it doesn't show up. People, days and times. And again, that's just my kind of personal experience. There is the 60-day trial on Boardmaker. But again, we've already kind of talked about some of the incompatibility issues with that. Any other specifics that anyone wants to add or put in about Boardmaker? I think we've all kind of experienced the same things. The last option, which is a really good option, I'm not sure where they ship to though. So if anybody, obviously everyone else is outside of the US. If you've got any experience with this, please let me know, because I did not happen to check to see about international. In terms of the US, I do know this Michigan's Alt Shift, they've converted most of the alternative access books. So alternative access eye gaze books, partner assisted visual scanning. They don't have the color coded access books. We think maybe because there just hasn't been a big request for that. I'm actually in the process of looking at a fully coded access for my daughter, as her access method has changed a little bit from partner assisted scanning. Some of the movements are a little bit fatiguing. Big thing with Alt Shift, they will cut the tabs and send the entire book to you. You just have to show proof of owning the PODD CDs and being to the PODD training. So if you're working with an advanced trainer like me, we would be able to use this, or as an advanced trainer, I can actually print the books. Or if you're working with someone on your team who could be a part of that, and then they would be able to reach out to Alt Shift for those books. But again, I don't know international details on that. Any questions about kind of the software or Alt Shift or anything that I talked about? Okay, I am going to stop the recording now, and then we can all chat. If you know anyone who is looking for resources or just wants to brainstorm, feel free to have them email me. You can check my website, aacexperience.org. You'll also see some tutorials that I have put up on different things. And I'm always looking for ideas of specific tutorials that people are looking for as well.